The Last of Us Part 2 has had its first gameplay reveal at this year's E3 show, and looked so good it had people questioning whether it was real gameplay or not. I for one trust Naughty Dog to deliver on their promises since they haven't let us down to date, and they always do push technology to the next level within their games, as we saw from Uncharted 4. Now that the gameplay has been out for a while and you have all had the opportunity to watch it, I'm going to be discussing what's new with The Last of Us Part 2's gameplay, and how it has improved from the original. Let's start with stealth. The Last of Us 2 has revamped its whole stealth mechanic, giving us the ability to hide in vegetation around the world while crouching. Although this hides Ellie, it isn't confirmed invisibility, as she can still be spotted if she's crouching in a patch of grass that doesn't visually cover her completely. So how well Ellie is hidden can depend on the length of the grass she is hiding within, as different patches of vegetation can be various sizes throughout the levels within the world. So here's where we spot a new mechanic in The Last of Us 2 besides the ability to hide in vegetation. Ellie can now also lay on the floor completely and move through the grass by shuffling forward with her arms and legs. While this hides Ellie much more so than crouching, it also slows down her mobility, which can be a problem if she remains in the same spot for too long. Since enemies in The Last of Us 2 have gotten a whole lot smarter and will eventually figure out Ellie's positioning if she doesn't stay on the move. Since Ellie is now able to lay on the floor, this helps us to understand how she can now hide under vehicles within the game, as it would make sense if you're that close to the floor you should be able to crawl under tight spaces. And this is exactly what Naughty Dog have done by introducing a passing through tight spaces mechanic within The Last of Us 2 that will allow Ellie to hide in small spaces like we saw within the car, or quickly change her positioning during a pursuit or within a fight, so she can gain a tactical advantage by quickly flanking enemies. I do expect there will also be much more to this mechanic that we haven't seen yet. Going back to enemies being more intelligent in The Last of Us 2, which is something that has got me quite excited about the game, since enemies now will not have to follow specific routes and can take any random path depending on what the game chooses, which means our movement will have to be a lot better. Enemies will also refer to each other by name, making them feel more like actual people and not just bad guy number 1, 2 and 3. They will also communicate by whistling and also check up on each other. If Ellie is spotted, over time the enemies that spotted her will communicate with enemies in different parts of the level to be alert, and they will eventually join on the search for Ellie. Enemies will also now check under cars during their searches, as well as various other places Ellie may hide within. And in this brutal moment we see we can actually shoot while hiding under vehicles. When this happens, we see another example of how the AI is improved. When Ellie shoots the lady looking under the car, the guy she was communicating with reacted to it instantly, like they actually had some sort of in-game relationship, which caused him to come over, pulling Ellie out from under the car and engaging in a him or me death struggle. I mean, this is some next level enemy intelligence. As for the environments, they will be a lot bigger compared to the first game, which means Ellie won't be travelling directly from point A to B. She will actually have options to what path she will take, since there will be various different routes, adding a more dynamic feel to the world. Although if the game does end up having collectibles, I feel us completionists will have a lot more exploring on our hands. During the demo we get our first look at the game's weapon wheel, and it seems there are slots for a handgun, bow and arrow, glass bottle, molotov, smoke bomb and medkits. A thing to notice here is that Ellie has more than one type of arrowhead, which we learn is an explosive arrowhead that will do area of effect damage to enemies and could potentially set up some explosive moments during the game. I suspect there will be more weapons within the world that we can equip into our inventories as we progress and upgrade Ellie, just like we did with Joel in the first game, since besides changing the ammo type, the weapon wheel isn't too different from The Last of Us. Ellie will also be able to pick weapons up from enemies that she has defeated, such as machetes and hammers, or like in the first game, pick them up if they're laying around the world on the ground. But the twist here is enemies can also now pick these weapons up laying around, so if Ellie doesn't take it, you can bet someone else will. Crafting is still very much going to be a core mechanic within The Last of Us 2, with us finding materials around the world and giving us the power to decide whether we want to craft a medkit or a molotov, since you will find certain items use the same crafting materials. But something new with this game, explained by the dev team, is that we will now be able to craft ammo, so I actually can't wait to see what the trade-off for crafting ammo will be, as it is sure to make the game even more intense in those situations where you're low on ammo but you may need the same materials to craft something else. It also seems that the in-game crafting menu is a tad more simpler in design, which makes it a less daunting task to craft something in the heat of battle. I found the damage output to be more realistic within this demo as well, as we see for the animations Ellie getting hurt seems a lot more severe. We also see certain enemies can actually be killed with one shot of an arrow too, and it actually doesn't have to be a headshot either. My favourite part of the gameplay demo showcasing this has to be when Ellie gets shot with the arrow and instantly falls to the floor. I mean, it makes it feel so much more real, and something extra to note here is, if Ellie gets shot with an arrow, it won't disappear or fall out. Instead, it has negative effects on her till she manually removes it. So this actually is a new mechanic within the game. That most likely means being shot by an arrow is worse than actually being shot by a bullet. bullet. Moving on to close range combat, Ellie will now have the ability to dodge incoming attacks and return with a counter attack of her own, which will allow her to fight multiple enemies at once. But unlike Joel, Ellie won't be using her fist as her blade is her base weapon, which is why I'm curious to see if there will actually be a need for shivs in The Last of Us 2, since in the first games Ellie's blade was the equivalent to Joel's crafted shivs. We also see that Ellie leans onto the car next to her during her fight, which means interactions with objects within the world has been taken to the next level, and I for one haven't ever seen fighting interactions display so much detail. The fluidity of this gameplay demo is just incredible, as it seems everything just seems to work in one continuous roll, as if it were real life. We see this when we see Ellie running and jumping over a gap. Oh yeah, this game has a jump button as well now too, which is probably due to the fact that Joel won't be around to give Ellie a boost during most of the game, so the girl needs to learn how to jump. But yes, as she is running she picks up a glass bottle, and while still running she throws it at an enemy, which had me like, whoa, that's cool, since you couldn't do that in the first game while running, and it all just looks so completely smooth. I mean, the attention to detail is insane now, and we see more of it when Ellie grabs an enemy for cover, and the arrow flying towards them kills Ellie's cover, but before she drops them she looks at her to check if she is dead before leaving her and moving on, since she is no longer useful cover. And it doesn't stop there either. When another guy shoots at Ellie and the bullet misses, it hits the glass window and shatters, so I expect that some environmental objects will be destructible within The Last of Us. Human enemy types won't be all the same as well, as we see during this moment this guy who is bigger than your average enemy wielding a two-handed weapon that puts out some serious damage if it hits, and these guys can also take a lot more damage than your standard enemy. This also seems a good opportunity to let you know that there will also be new types of infected within The Last of Us, which we learnt from Neil Druckmann, meaning runners, stalkers, clickers and bloaters won't be the only type of infected in the game. Thinking about this, these are various different stages of a human when they get infected, so I believe this is basically telling us that we will be seeing non-human infected, meaning animals such as dogs, because unless the virus has evolved I don't see how a new type of human infected could exist. Every action Ellie does now seems to be realistic and not like your typical video game, like when she takes an arrow from her body there's an animation for it rather than it automatically disappearing into her inventory with a slight and quick arm animation. It seems every action takes real world time and effort, which just adds to the overall realism to the world. There is also one more detail that I learned outside of the gameplay demo that I was happy to hear about, and that is listening mode will be returning for The Last of Us 2, which for me makes more sense for Ellie to have since she is infected, and since infected such as clickers are sensitive to sound, it would be cool if somehow, although Ellie is immune, that carrying the virus somehow increased her sensitivity to sound. I mean, I know it's a video game and there doesn't have to be a reason for everything, but again I think it would be cool. So this is basically everything I was able to gather with what's new within the world of The Last of Us 2 when it's concerning gameplay. It seems Naughty Dog have focused on a bunch of small details, making them as perfect as possible, that all contribute to making the final piece as incredible, realistic, dynamic and fluid as possible. I for one can't wait to get my hands on the game. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Unplayed by Vix. Press the notification bell for future content as well as the thumbs up in whichever direction you please. Thank you for watching, take care, and I shall catch you guys in the next one.